Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today we are moving forward with our series of previews for the in-season tournament, the NBA's first year doing this new in-season tournament format. So, if you're unfamiliar, we've been going through each of the 6 groups for this in-season tournament, 3 per conference, and we've been sort of talking about uh, the expectations for each of the teams in that group. So we're going to be doing the same here, moving along to Group B in the Eastern Conference. So we'll be diving into that in just a second. Before we do, though, just a quick plug for some of the other episodes. That doesn't seem like the right word, but the other videos in this series, let's put it that way. This is part 3 of the series. If you want to watch part 2, will be up on your screen somewhere if you want to click on that little link in the corner. We'll also have a link in the description of the video to part 2, along with the entirety of this playlist, which should now have about half the videos that we're planning to make in total in them. So whether you're looking for a specific part or the playlist in general, those will be available to you. But enough stalling, enough shameless plugging. Let's get to Group B in the East. The 5 teams in this group are the Charlotte Hornets, the Miami Heat, the Milwaukee Bucks, the New York Knicks, and the Washington Wizards. So, pretty clear, I'd say, sort of division among some of these teams in this group. Maybe not quite as balanced or competitive as maybe the last video where we had the West Group A, which I said was probably going to be maybe one of the more competitive groups in this in-season tournament. But either way, we are going to talk about East Group B here, and we will start with an explanation of the format, because I did kind of forget about that. We're dividing these teams into 3 categories, those categories being favorites, contenders, and long shots, each of those sections representing the team's likelihood to win their group. Once we've got the teams divided into their sections, we'll talk about one team that I think is most likely to exceed those expectations, and one team that obviously is most likely to maybe disappoint and finish a little bit lower than where I projected them to be. So, with that in mind, let's get into the projections themselves. We're starting with the favorite sections here in East Group B, and there's a couple of squads at the top that you probably expect to see. In the favorite section, I have the Milwaukee Bucks, along with the Miami Heat. So, we'll start with the Bucks first, and we'll just sort of get this out of the way right off the top of the bat here. I think that the team's early playoff exit is coloring people's expectations a little bit too much here. I think the Bucks are being ever so slightly discounted because they did end up sort of dropping out much earlier than they thought that they would, but to be honest, I would say that that's probably the exception and not the new normal here for Milwaukee, right? The team still got Giannis, still one of the best players on the planet. They managed to keep both Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez this offseason, to incredibly important aspects of their core, and they managed to bring them both back, and they continue to have some pretty solid depth around their cores. Maybe the bench looks slightly different this year compared to last, but for the most part, it looks relatively similar. They've still got guys, well, not really bench guys, but guys like Grayson Allen, guys like Drew Holiday, who know their role on this team and play it exceptionally well. Bobby Portis, I think, sort of falls maybe into that category as well. So they will be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference for sure, right? They were last season as well, even with the early playoff exit. So I would imagine, given the experience and the continuity that that roster has, in the first couple months of the season when the group play games are going to actually be played, the Bucks should be pretty damn stable, and they should be near the top of this group's standings. So we shall see. But like I said, I think everyone's maybe looking a little bit too much into the fact that they got bounced early in the playoffs. But We move on from the Bucks to the team that actually did eliminate them, the Miami Heat, also in this favorite section. Basically, they're kind of the opposite of the Bucks here. Whereas I was saying, I think people maybe were discrediting the Bucks for their early exit. The Heat are being sort of undervalued despite having made a run to the finals. Everyone thinks that the Bucks early exit, well, not everyone, shouldn't say that, but a lot of people think that the Bucks early exit is, like I said, not an exception but the new normal, whereas they think that the Heat's finals run is very much an exception and not a reflection of how good the team is, just because of how just aggressively sort of middle of the pack they were in the regular season. And that's true. That is a concern. But I think it's being blown a little bit out of proportion here. The Heat are still a very strong team. If that Damian Lillard trade does ever actually happen, which, I mean, at this point, who knows? But if a Lillard trade does happen, then this debate is basically over, right? If Damian Lillard gets added to the Heat, this team is in this favorite section with basically zero argument. But in the situation that they're in right now with no trade, the Heat are still a pretty dangerous team, right? Jimmy Butler's still there. Bam Adebayo is still there. They are a fantastic duo to build the rest of your team around. And they're adding, or re-adding, a hopefully healthy Tyler Hero to the mix here too, to maybe be that third option for them. I think that they're going to be okay. There are some concerns with some of the pieces that they've lost, though, around the edges, right? Max Strus goes to Cleveland. Gabe Vincent ends up going to Los Angeles. The Lakers specifically should specify that. So, yeah, they did lose a little bit of their depth overall, but they've got some of their draft picks coming up. Hockey's Junior's looking pretty damn good. Jovic has another year of development after kind of a ho-hum rookie season. So if you're the Heat, lean on your core players and hope that the youth movement sort of comes up and slides into position to just sort of replace some of the guys that you lost. But if all goes well, I would say that the Heat are still in a strong position and are probably one of the better squads in this group. But that moves us out of the favorite section into the contenders here for East Group B. And we've only got one squad in this section for now, and that is the New York Knicks. Now, the Knicks have worked hard to climb out of basically the basement of the Eastern Conference. They were in a very bad place for a pretty extended stretch of time. But this new era of at least semi-competitiveness is pretty good for them. They've built it to last, and I don't think they're fading away anytime soon, right? They didn't make deep runs. They're not going to the Eastern Conference Finals immediately, or the NBA Finals for that matter, but they're going to be in the playoff picture pretty consistently, I would say, over the next couple of years, as long as they don't mess something up. So they've got a solid foundation, right? They've got Brunson, they've got Randall. We're waiting to see if RJ Barrett has his sort of full breakout season still, but the roster's built well. The interior outside of Randall has some questions. I know there's a lot of people who are big fans of Hartenstein, but I would like to see him maybe get a little bit more consistent, or maybe Robinson sort of slides into that spot as well, because other than Randall, the big men are kind of just there a lot of the time, but that is something that they would need to improve, and that's part of the reason why I have them here in the contender section and not in the favorites, because they are good. They are very much in a position to be one of those top 5, top 6 teams in the Eastern Conference, but I'm not quite sure that I would take them straight up against the Bucks or the Heat yet. I think there's still just a little bit of a gap between where the Knicks are at right now and where teams like the Heat and the Bucks were, at least in the playoffs last year. So they've got a little bit more improvement to do, but they kept most, if not all, of their group from last season intact. So the continuity should allow them to build better chemistry, improve as a team, and who knows? In the early stages of the season, anything could happen. The Knicks could come out hot. Other teams like the Bucks or the Heat could be a little slow to start, and the Knicks could sort of make a show of it. So we will have to see. But I do have them ever so slightly behind those other two teams for now. But with that being said, we move on now to the long shots of East Group B, We've got the Charlotte Hornets and the Washington Wizards in here. A couple of squads who want to be moving in different directions, but don't appear to be just yet. We'll start with the Hornets, because there is potential on the Hornets roster, right? We know that, but we have no idea what the team's actual performance will look like. You've got guys like Lonzo Ball. You've got, honestly, I guess we'll even say Terry Rozier in there, right? PJ Washington has looked very impressive early on in his career, and controversy aside, if Miles Bridges is healthy and can play, he will help the Charlotte Hornets as a basketball team. There's other stuff off the court, obviously, that they're still going to have to sort of contend with, but in terms of pure basketball, he can obviously help them. He was averaging over 20 points a game before he had to basically take that year off because of the charges case against him. I don't want to go into too much detail about that, but the Charlotte Hornets have potential. They've got a lot of young guys. They've got players who we know can contribute. We just haven't necessarily seen them do it on a consistent basis. The problem with that is we have no idea when the potential is going to actually translate into success for the team, right? I kind of mentioned that at the top. We have no idea what the actual performance of this squad will look like. Maybe they right the ship. Maybe they look okay at some point in the season. Maybe by season's end, they're in that sort of play-in sort of window, competing for a spot in the postseason. But I highly doubt that point where they right the ship and they look okay and the potential develops in the way that they want comes early enough in the year to compete in this group, in the in-season tournament, right? Because you're asking the Hornets to suddenly have figured it out over the offseason and come out in the first 2 months basically on fire, and I don't think that's going to happen. But the Hornets are on their way up, only because there's really not much further for them to fall down, but it's not going to be coming fast enough, that's for sure. In the meantime, for the Washington Wizards, they're in full-on rebuild mode at this point, right? Bradley Beal ends up being traded away. Kristaps Porzingis gets traded away. You do have some assets to work with, though. That's for sure. They re-sign Kyle Kuzma, or they don't re-sign him. I think he opted into his player option, technically speaking. They got Jordan Poole back from the Warriors, so there are some names on that roster. This is not going to be no one out there on the court for the Wizards, but I don't really know if this is going to be enough. The Wizards also have a lot of sort of young-ish guys, who are developing. Guys like Corey Kispert, guys like Denny Avdia, guys like Daniel Gafford, who are all coming along nicely, but I don't think any one of them in particular was ready to take up the mantle of being the number one guy for the Wizards, which is where Kuzma coming back and Poole being traded might help out, because one of those two guys maybe pops off, becomes the clear number one option in this offense, and those three guys I mentioned can take maybe one or two, but let's say one for now, one more season to develop around a sort of tentpole player where they don't have to accept the full responsibility for the team's offense. So yeah, the Wizards feels like they're still in the development phase. Maybe Kuzma or Poole just starts lighting it up at the start of the season, but I don't think that's enough for the team as a whole to win enough games head-to-head in this group to really matter. So I am heavily discounting the Wizards. I would love to be wrong. I would love for the Jordan Poole revenge tour to get started right from the very start of the season, but I think it's extremely unlikely to happen. But there you go. 5 teams sorted into our 3 categories here, so we will recap what we've got so far in East Group B. We've got the Milwaukee Bucks and the Miami Heat in the favorites section. We got the New York Knicks there in the middle in the contenders section, and the Charlotte Hornets and the Washington Wizards are down in the long shots category. So, with that being said, we're going to move on to our next little section here. One team that I think will overperform my projections, and one team that I think is most likely to underperform. So, we'll start with the overperformance first, and the team that I picked here is the New York Knicks. And you might have seen this coming if you were hearing what I was saying about them in the contenders section, because I think the Knicks could be ready to take that next step. but we're not 100% sure yet. The Knicks honestly may not have added much more in the offseason. They didn't really go out and find any sort of massive free agent pickup, but what they have on roster is pretty good already, right? We talked about that potential trio they're looking at of Brunson, Barrett, and Randall. Barrett still has to prove that he is sort of able to play up to that contract that they gave him, but 2/3 of the triangle is already in place. I think you would find Randall and Brunson, for the most part, reliable enough for the Knicks to work with moving forward. But I also mentioned for the Knicks, maybe they come out a little bit hotter than some of the other teams, considering these group play games are in the early stages of the season. They could be sort of ready to go faster than teams like Miami and Milwaukee, who maybe with some slightly older lineups take a little bit longer to get themselves going. I don't really know the exact specifics of it, but there's definitely a scenario here where the Knicks sort of continuity gets them off to a faster start than some of the other teams, and they take that step up and really do compete to potentially win this group, especially if Jalen Brunson brings to the Knicks season what he's doing for Team USA right now, because the stats that we've seen from him, the passing game in particular, has been pretty damn impressive. I think they just had an international friendly where he shot like 9 of 9 from the field as well. So if Brunson can play at that level for the Knicks at the start of the season, they could definitely be a threat in this group. So the Knicks, definitely the squad I think is most likely to exceed my projections here. In terms of the team most likely to maybe underperform, I am going to go with the Miami Heat. Now, I know I talked them up in their section saying that people were sort of undervaluing their run to the finals, and I still do stand by that. The Heat are a lot better than I think some people are giving them credit for, but they are also the team with the most potential to regress. That part really isn't up for debate either. If they get the Lillard trade again, all of this does kind of change a little bit. But without a Lillard trade, the Heat have to really hope for a couple of things to go their way very early to compete in this group, right? First and foremost, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo have to be ready to go. Can't be a ramp-up period. They have to be ready right out of the gate. Tyler Hero needs to be at 100% in terms of his health. He needs to live up to his contract. He needs to go right back to averaging 20 points a game like he was before he ended up going down. So, like I said, a lot of things have to go right, and that's not even really the whole of it. That's just the main pieces here. I talked about Max Strus and Gabe Vincent being gone. Their production has to be accounted for, right? They didn't exactly always put up consistent numbers, but between the two of them, someone was always putting in something extra to help this team, right? So someone in the lineup has to be able to provide those points. You would hope that that guy is Hero, but maybe it has to come from the bench. You need to hope that some of your pickups in the offseason work out. Guys like Thomas Bryant, guys like Josh Richardson need to work out. Not necessarily becoming integral pieces here, right? They're not going to put up massive numbers, but you need them to play their role and be efficient doing it. So there's a lot of questions here, and that's not even sort of taking into account. I talked about guys like Jovic and Hakis Jr. I mean, Hakis Jr. is in his first year, Jovic is in his second. So I talked about the benefits they could provide if their development's coming along nicely and they can contribute early. But that's a lot to ask a first or second year guy to come in to a team with aspirations of getting back to the finals and say, hey, you got to contribute right now on 1 or 2 years experience. So when it happens, it's great, but it is kind of rare to see that happen. And if it doesn't, that along with 3 or 4 other sort of moving parts here for the Heat could really derail them, especially early in the season. So that is why I think the Heat are the most likely to sort of maybe fall back a little bit in terms of these projections. But again, we'll have to see. A lot of this is speculation, obviously, here in the offseason, but that is what I've got. So that is going to do it for Group B in the Eastern Conference. So feel free to let me know what you think. In terms of the most sort of contentious projections I put up here, because I've been doing that for every group so far, probably the Heat and the Knicks. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who effectively might sort of switch the places of those two teams, and honestly, that would be understandable if you did. I'm putting a lot of sort of stock in what the Heat did in the playoffs. Other people may discount it a little bit more. Other people may like what they saw from the Knicks a little bit more last season as well. But other than that, I think everyone else is relatively solid. But feel free to let me know what you think. Right? Are the Heat being overvalued? Do you think that the Bucks just bounce back after their early exit? Do you think one of the Hornets or the Wizards might actually do something in this group? Because I think it's extremely unlikely, but maybe there's some people with more hopeful projections for those two squads than I had. But either way, please feel free to let me know your thoughts on this group. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.